right, so let's address some weight training, resistance training myths, and frequently asked questions. The first question that I get asked a lot is, it will get you bulky, or will resistance training get you bulky? No, if you are doing a level that is within a normal means, and most people who are just lifting for life and just feeling better, you will not get bulky by any means, especially if you're a woman. This is usually asked from women. You will not get bulky, especially usually where you build strength and muscle. Usually it's a lot in legs and your butt area. So don't worry about getting bulky. Also, I want, for perspective, think about this. If you think about how easy it, quote unquote, would be for you to get bulky. Think about all the dudes right now who would be lifting weights. They would be huge. They would be bulky, but they're not, because it doesn't happen that quickly. And a lot of times it just improves your body composition, makes you look better in general. The next myth we're going to talk about is lifting is dangerous. Resistance training is dangerous, and this is completely false. As we talked about earlier in the podcast, usually it becomes dangerous when people are lifting loads or doing movements they're unfamiliar with. If you've never back squatted before and you load on 300 pounds, yeah, that's going to be dangerous. It's a heavy load for you that you've never done, and it's also movement you've never done. So that does become dangerous, but inherently if you're doing a really controlled bicep curls, for example, that you control the movement, it's well within your range, nothing dangerous at all. Actually, in fact, you could argue it might be even more dangerous to neglect doing that weight training, from the fact that your muscles are going to become weaker, your joint tissue is going to become weaker, all these different things are going to become weaker. Lifting is not dangerous as long as it's in your means, volume, and overall understanding of the exercise. Another question I might get asked from runners is, will it make you slower? It could, to some degree. If you're building more muscle mass, of course, you might be gaining a little bit of weight. So yes, literally you might have more mass. But also too, if you have more muscle mass, it's going to take more oxygen when you're breathing it in. We talked about cardiovascular system earlier. You take in oxygen, it goes in through the lungs bring it into the bloodstream, and that brings it to the tissues. Your muscle tissues are one of those tissues it brings it to. So if you have more active muscle, even if it's not like a muscle that directly affects running, it's going to suck up some of that oxygen, which is going to make it a little bit tougher for you to run. So it could a little bit, but with that said, if you are thinking about getting into weightlifting and running, again, we just talked about, you're not going to get super bulky from it. Just adding a little bit of resistance training for injury prevention, injury risk reduction, I should say, and improved performance for your running is extremely advantageous, as long as you're not getting a bunch of weight, which you likely wouldn't, because you're probably running a lot and monitoring your calories well. Another question I get asked is, how long should your sessions be? When it comes to strength training, you could probably bang out your session in about 30 to 45 minutes. And this is usually based off the fact that most people are going to be lifting 3 to 4 times a week. And to get every major muscle group, which is what I'd recommend, doing full body 3 to 4 times a week if you're just doing it for longevity, you can get that done in about 30 minutes if you're pressed. 45 minutes would be a little bit better, probably more enjoyable, not as difficult for you. But yeah, both of those would be pretty good. You can do it longer. There's people who weight train for a living, and they might lift 2 to 3 hours a day. But for most people in the general public, 30 to 44 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes, is probably good for you. Also, cardio will ruin my weightlifting progress. We just talked about this earlier. It might have a very slight decrement if you're doing them in the same session. If you're doing them on the opposite sessions, there's almost no issues at all with overall resistance training or muscular growth. But this goes back to your goals. Are you somebody who's trying to max out your overall strength potential? Probably not a good idea to run and train for a marathon at the same time, right? If you're working at a reasonable level, it's not really going to affect it. But if you're trying to maximize one part of strength, one part of muscular size, it's going to have to give at some point. Another thing that I thought when I was younger is you need protein powder to build muscle. This is not the case. Protein powder isn't something magical. It is literally just protein that has been basically... So whey protein is usually what protein's powder made of. That's a byproduct of dairy and cheese and basically dairy products. It's then converted, processed into a powder form, usually added some chocolate flavoring or vanilla flavoring, some good flavoring to make it taste better. And then after that, basically, it's just protein. It's no different from getting chicken breast. It's no different from getting eggs. It's the same dang thing. So you don't need protein powder. You do need protein. And if protein powder is a good source of that for you, then by all means, but you don't need protein powder specifically. There's nothing magical about it that will help you compared to eating just regular food. In fact, if you're able to eat just regular food, I would do that. Protein powder does taste good though. I like it. Another myth I always get is that I'm going to do core exercises or I'm going to do arm exercises to burn fat around that area. That is completely false. You cannot do that. There's no such thing as spot reducing. I will say there's a very, very, very small spot reducing fat thing that can happen, but it's going to be so negligible that you won't even, it's not even worth your time. The way you lose fat is by losing weight over time throughout your entire body through a calorie deficit, which we've talked about. Cardio can help with this. Weight training can help with this. It can all help. You can't spot reduce fat doing a specific exercise. Next question, should I do cardio before or after my weights? And I wanted to re-put this in just for anyone who's listening to this certain section and not the section on cardio. Should you do cardio before or after your weights, or should you do weights before, vice versa, whatever? I usually tell people depends on their goals. It doesn't really matter that much in the long term. So strength training, if you're trying to get stronger and improve your muscle mass, I would do that first. If you're trying to improve your overall cardiovascular work through cardiovascular exercise, I'd do that first. Just go off your priorities, make it easy. Two last ones. These myths are, this is one of the worst things I hate, and this really grinds my gears. When people say squats are bad for your knees, deadlifts are bad for your back. We talked about this earlier. The specific movements aren't what's bad. What's bad is that people usually do the movements after never doing a similar movement, so they've never deadlifted before, and then they also decide to try to max out their first day. One, you're increasing the overall load on your tissues that has never been challenged before, and two, you're just not familiar with the movement. If you're proficient in a movement and you are strong enough for that load, at your current capabilities, there's no exercise that's inherently more dangerous than literally sitting and doing nothing, right? So please, everyone, quit telling people to be careful when you lift weights. Yes, we're going to be careful, but this is no different from telling somebody to be careful when you sit down, right? You're doing a movement.